On one of the most important days of my life, Clara deliberately broke my bracelet. My brother grabbed my arm and said, "Clara kindly wished you well. Did you deliberately break the bracelet to frame her?" My boyfriend sneered at me and raised his chin. "You choose. Either take off this cursed thing and continue with the marriage, or—" I tore off the veil and threw it at his face. "I choose the third path. I don't want love or family ties anymore." But later they regretted it, desperately searching for me, wanting me to come back. The mirror in the dressing room reflects my pale face. Her fingers unconsciously stroke the jade bracelet on her wrist, the cool touch making her fingertips tremble. This was given to me by my grandmother just before she passed away. She said that jade nurtures a person and can protect me from disasters. Disaster prevention? I stared at the winding emerald patterns in the bracelet and suddenly burst into laughter. The loud crash of the door being slammed open interrupted the thoughts. Clara stumbled to the dressing table, her hair disheveled, her eyes red-rimmed, looking just like a frightened rabbit, if one overlooked the fleeting smile at the corner of her mouth. "Avril, I came to bring you a bouquet." Her voice trembled as she reached out to touch the pearl hairpin in the jewelry box. I instinctively protected the box. Over the years, how many things has she accidentally broken of mine? At 12, I broke the glass lamp my mother gave me. At 15, I tore up the sketch I won an award for. Last month, I even accidentally burned the letter Gray wrote to me. But this time, she didn't touch the hairpin. She suddenly stumbled and bumped into me, her diamond bracelet snagging on my bangle. A crisp sound. The jade bracelet cracked with 3 seams, and tiny fragments splashed on the ground, scattering small glimmers of light. I stood frozen in place, my eardrums buzzing. Clara's cry pierced sharply. Why did Avril push me? I just wanted to touch the bracelet. The door to the dressing room was pushed open again. Sean's bow tie was askew, his breath heavy, and as his gaze swept over the scattered shards of jade, his pupils suddenly constricted.
"Avril."
He grabbed my arm. "Clara kindly wished you well. Did you deliberately break the bracelet to frame her?" I stared at the sapphire cufflinks on his suit sleeve. That was the birthday gift I bought with my first month's salary. Now trembling slightly with his furious breaths. "Brother, this is Grandma's heirloom." "Then what?" He sneered. "Clara is a living person. You need to apologize to her right now." "Apologize?" Gray leaned against the door frame, interrupting him with an unlit cigarette pinched between his fingers. He wasn't wearing a tuxedo, and on his chest was pinned a cartoon rabbit brooch that Clara had embroidered last year. "Why don't I choose for Avril?" He tilted his chin at me. "Take off this cursed thing and continue the wedding, or—" "I choose the third path." I tore off the veil and threw it at Gray's face, and the bracelet also snapped with a crack, finally breaking completely. Fragments fell softly through the gaps between the fingers. I bent down to pick up a piece of broken jade. The sharp edge cut into the palm. Blood droplets seeped into the cracks of the jade bracelet, like the blood my mother coughed onto the handkerchief before she passed away. "I will tell the guests that this wedding is cancelled." Gray's laughter was like shards of glass scraping against the eardrum. He raised his hand and stuffed the cigarette into the corner of his mouth. In the flickering light of the spark, those eyes that once picked gardenias for me were filled with mockery. If it weren't for my parents threatening me with inheritance rights, do you think I would have acted so deeply in love with you for so many years? Clara huddled behind him, sobbing, tears falling like beads, as if what had shattered was not the jade bracelet, but her spine. I clenched the broken jade in my palm. The split mouth pierced into the flesh, causing pain that jolted one awake. Just like that year when he was 14, when he climbed over the wall to skip class and took me to see an outdoor movie. As we left under the street light, he said, "Childhood betrothal is great. It saves me the trouble of proposing later." At that time, his ears were bright red, unlike now, when even humiliating me comes with a relaxed ease. "Gray, don't say any more." Clara tugged at his sleeve, the diamond bracelet on her wrist hurting my eyes. "Avril just really wants to marry you." "Want to get married?" Gray suddenly extinguished his cigarette, his leather shoe grinding over the shattered pieces of the jade bracelet. If she weren't the beloved daughter of the Goof family, would this wooden beauty even be worthy of entering the Lin family door? Sean suddenly moved. He loosened his tie and approached me. "Are you done making a scene?" Are you satisfied now that Clara is crying so hard she's having an asthma attack? Go out now and tell the officiant to continue the wedding, and I'll pretend nothing happened. A very familiar tone. Last year at the Lynn family's banquet, Clara spilled red wine on my dress, and he apologized to me like this. Clara didn't mean to. What did you want her to do? I turned and walked towards the banquet hall, blood dripping from my fingers onto the hem of my dress. Gray laughed behind him. To catch someone, let them go. When the noise of the guests surged towards me like a wave, I saw the puzzled and uneasy faces of Lynn's parents. The hand of the host handing over the microphone trembled. I licked away the taste of blood from the corner of my mouth and aimed at the dark sea of cameras below. Thank you all for coming to my annulment banquet. The sound of shattered cups and plates came from the corner, and Gray finally squeezed to the front of the stage, his collar askew, and the rabbit brooch on his chest had somehow been torn off. Avril, are you crazy? He reached out to grab the microphone, his nails digging into my arm, leaving marks. Come back with me. At worst, I'll pick you a jade bracelet that's 10 times more expensive. I turned to the side to dodge, raising my blood-soaked left hand. Fragments of jade embedded in the flesh, like a cluster of flames that are about to extinguish, yet still flicker. Gray said this marriage was my scheme. I smiled at the camera, catching a glimpse of the joy in Clara's eyes. Then let everyone witness. From now on, I have no relationship with Gray whatsoever. Gray's face turned pale. At that moment, I heard Sean's muffled grunt. He went barehanded to grasp the sharp shards of jade, blood seeping out from the cuff of his suit, leaving dark stains. Just like that year when I gave him cufflinks, and he laughed while ruffling my hair. Avril, I'll always have your back. The sound of camera shutters from the audience poured down like a torrential rain. I walked over to Sean, carefully gathered the broken bracelet, and wrapped it in a handkerchief, then headed towards the door. April Gray reached out his hand to me. As Gray's hand brushed against the hem of my skirt, Clara suddenly fell softly into Sean's arms. Brother, I can't breathe. She clutched her chest, tears precisely hitting the back of Sean's hand, like the blue ink spilled on my painting years ago. Gray reached out and forcefully pulled back my arm, wrapping it around Clara's shoulder. Where's the medicine? Where did you put your asthma inhaler? I stared at the lipstick mark on the back of his suit collar, exactly the same as the one I had wiped off while trying on makeup. My best friend Piper's car was blocking the hotel revolving door, honking loudly.
Avril.
She leaned halfway out of the car window, her emerald earrings swaying in the wind like green shooting stars. Avril will take you to eat at 10 dessert shops. In the rearview mirror, Sean was carrying Clara horizontally as he ran toward the lounge, with Gray stumbling behind, clutching a bottle of medicine. When I had a high fever at 12, they panicked like this too, but now they are rushing towards another carefully rehearsed fainting spell. Gray, you bastard, and your brother, did a dog chew on your eyeballs? Piper slammed the accelerator, the car's engine roaring, the scent of the air freshener mixing with the bloody smell of my palm, creating a kind of spicy wake-up call. I rolled down the car window, letting the night wind rush into my throat. When we played hide-and-seek as kids, Gray took the blame for me 3 times, and Sean helped me with my summer homework for 3 whole years. The broken bracelet and the handkerchief, like Grandma's intermittent reminders as she lay dying. Avril, you must wear the bracelet when you get married. The bracelet is inlaid with a pigeon blood ruby, which my grandmother personally brought back from a mine in Myanmar. That year, I stood on tiptoe by the workbench, watching the silver-haired old man carve intricate vine patterns on the inside of the bracelet with a chisel. Is Grandma casting a spell? It is a blessing. She dipped the vermilion to outline the ruby pedestal. On the day Avril gets married, when the moonlight shines in, it will reveal your name here. The day the bracelet was put on, Gray and Sean were fighting in the living room. 15-year-old Gray tugged at Sean's collar. You promised that I would take Avril to Disney this weekend. What right do you have to steal her away? Father held the teacup, smiling as he watched the play, while Mother hummed a song in the kitchen, frying eggs. The sound of the oil splattering filled the air with warmth. The years before Clara appeared were like a gilded cloisonné box. Even the arguments were edged with honey. It was freezing rain on the day of my grandmother's funeral. After returning home, I curled up on the sofa with the jade bracelet, saying nothing. After my father entered the room, he walked towards me, not to comfort me, but to introduce a girl in a pink fluffy dress to me and Sean. The tips of her hair were still dusted with snow, but her eyes shone with an unsettling brightness, like a wildcat that had wandered into a porcelain shop. Clara's parents sacrificed themselves during the rescue. The father kept his hand on her trembling shoulder. From now on, this is your sister. Sean was the first to crouch down, using the handkerchief that had wiped my tears to clean her face. Don't be afraid, brother will protect you. That night, Clara accidentally stumbled into my room and knocked over Grandma's treasure chest. When a jade bracelet fell at her feet, she suddenly looked up and smiled at me. Avril, guess who will believe you this time? Gray burst in just as he saw her pressing my wrist down onto the emerald shards. The moment the blood bead emerged, Clara screamed and fell into his arms. Avril insisted I wear this. I accidentally. That winter's snow was truly cold. So cold that even the light in the young man's eyes froze. Later, Clara changed her surname to go under her father's arrangement. On the day she changed her surname, Clara came to knock on my door wearing the sapphire cufflinks I gave to Sean. Avril, look, Dad said this is what befits the daughter of the Goo family. She twirled the cufflink with her fingertips, the blue light flickering over the family photo on my bedside table, in which my father held me in a princess dress. Now the owner of that dress was pressing the frame down on the table. The last scramble occurred on the night of the winter solstice. The jade safety lock designed by Grandma lay in Clara's palm, and she tilted her head and smiled at me. Brother Sean said that things worn by the dead are unlucky. Avril won't be angry, right? I reached out to snatch it, but my father grabbed my wrist. If Clara likes it, give it to her. If your grandmother were alive, she would definitely want to cherish her too. As Clara fell, Gray happened to push the door open. Avril, that's enough. He caught the sobbing Clara, who was hiccuping, with one hand and pinned me against the display case with the other. Do you have to make such a scene every time to feel satisfied? The glass cabinet door pressed against my back, and I saw 15-year-old Gray in the frame, handing me candy chestnuts. Piper parked the car in the shade of the phoenix tree, gripping the steering wheel tightly. I'll go in with you. If that green tea acts up again, I will. Don't drag down the Tang family's business. I pressed down on the back of her hand, which was bulging with veins. Last month, Gray cut off 3 collaborations with the Tang family, simply because Piper splashed half a glass of champagne on Clara at the party. The old house's corridor light flickered on and off, much like those days of pretending to be asleep. At 16, Clara secretly wore my dress and tore the waist. My father said, let her have it. At 18, she fraudulently claimed my design and won an award. Sean said, Clara needs recognition more. Last night, she crushed my engagement, and they said, Clara has been wronged. At the entrance, I pointed to the trembling dandelion under the light for Piper. You see, some things just scatter when the wind blows. Clara curled up on the silk sofa, painting her nails, the bright red polish dripping onto her grandmother's favorite Sue embroidery cushion. Oh dear! Why is Avril back so early? She swung her little feet, the diamond anklet entwined with the pearls she took from my jewelry box back then. Gray said you were like a piece of stubborn toffee, and sure enough. All right, stop bothering me. From now on, Sean and Gray are yours. I don't want those 2 trash anymore. I walked straight past her to the safe. The password was my grandmother's death anniversary. Clara suddenly dropped the nail polish bottle, stepping barefoot on the ground covered in scarlet. What are you pretending to be so noble for? You don't want it? Can you even afford it? They were originally my trophies. She picked up the photo frame on the coffee table, a family portrait from my 5th birthday, and my face in the picture was burned with a cigarette. But you think Gray chose me for what reason? She laughed maniacally, her nails digging into the glass frame. Every time he holds me, he says I cry 1,000 times more vividly than you. The moment the safe popped open, she suddenly became as quiet as a ghost. I took out the remnants of the jade bracelet and carefully placed them in the safe. The moonlight invited in from the window, casting my name on the inner wall's vine-like patterns. Clara's face suddenly twisted, like a demon revealed by a spell. She rushed over and pushed the safe down. When the safe crashed to the ground, Clara's scream was as sharp as a blade scraping against porcelain. The old treasures I cherished poured out like an avalanche. The crystal music box Gray gave me rolled to her feet. The cherry blossom specimen from my 16th year shattered into powder, and the bracelet he spent 3 months making for me was now tangled in Clara's diamond anklet, like a dying snake. Why did Avril push me? She curled up on the carpet, 10 centimeters away from the glass shards, crying as she looked up. I am too familiar with this expression. Last year she used this very demeanor to lock me in the attic with Sean for an entire night. Gray burst in and knocked over the blue and white porcelain vase in the entrance. The entwined lotus pattern that Grandma loved most had cracked into 8 petals amidst the chaos on the ground. He stepped on the shards and pulled my wrist, under the crystal chandelier. I saw 2 reflections of myself and his pupils, one covered in blood, on the verge of collapse, and the other gently enveloped by the moonlight of 15 years. You will never learn to be kind, will you? He slammed me against the sharp corner of the cabinet, and the moment my back hit the metal floral design, I heard the faint sound of my scapula cracking. The basketballs he blocked for me and the vicious dogs he held back in those years have now turned into ice picks stabbing into my ribs. Clara sobbed at the right moment. Gray, don't blame Avril. It was my fault for touching Grandma's bracelet. Gray, hearing this, became even angrier, his hand gripping my shoulder so tightly it felt like it was digging into my bones. Clara puts up with everything, and you still want to nitpick over a lifeless object? I've already agreed to marry you, what more do you want? My blood flows down my calf into the high heels, sticky and warm. I fumbled to pick up a half-torn sketch. On the night of my 18th birthday, Gray held his portrait outside the studio window, fireworks exploding behind him into a sea of stars. Look, my Avril is more dazzling than the moon. Now this face is soaked in red wine stains. I crumple the paper and throw it at his chest. Gray got it wrong. It's me who won't let myself go. The crumpled paper startled the enamel box on the coffee table, causing it to roll out a string of faded paper cranes, each with Mary Avril written on its wings, folded the night before his college entrance exam. Gray suddenly froze like a statue, his Adam's apple bobbing as he tried to say something, but was interrupted by Clara's sobs. It hurts. She clutched her smooth, new ankle and sobbed, Gray, am I going to be lame? Gray bent down to hold her, his movements seeming to be pressed on slow motion, the cuff of his suit brushing against my bleeding knee. Go to the hospital yourself, the wedding will still go on as planned. The last half of the sentence felt as light as if trying to convince oneself. Their departing figures overlap with the old times. On a stormy night at 14, Gray held me, who was suffering from acute gastroenteritis, and rushed towards the emergency room. In the puddles crushed under his white sneakers, he shouted louder than the thunder, Avril, don't sleep. We promised to have 2 daughters. At that moment, his leather shoes crushed the remnants of the crystal music box, and in the instant the gears splintered. I heard my 16-year-old self asking under the starry sky, will you always be biased towards me? The boy pressed the warm milk tea against my frozen red ear tips. If I, Gray, ever change my heart, punish me by making me unable to find an umbrella every time it thunders. Suddenly, lightning flashed and thunder rumbled outside the window, and a torrential rain poured down. I curled up on my grandmother's favorite Persian carpet, watching the blood droplets meander along the cracks of the jade, converging into my name within the entwined patterns. It turns out that Grandma's blessings have never failed. It's just that some people cannot be illuminated even by the moonlight in their blind eyes. On the 3rd day of hospitalization, the magnolias outside had shed their blooms, and the nurse said that a Miss Clara had sent a bouquet. I stared at the printed words, wishing you a speedy recovery on the card with a cold smile. Clara was too lazy to even write it by hand. In the drawer of the bedside table lay Sean's crocodile skin wallet and Gray's platinum cufflinks, both of which they had left here before. The caregiver said someone would come to pick it up this morning, so I had everything thrown into a cardboard box and then called a local express delivery to send it back to the old house. When Piper burst in holding the immigration documents, I was video notarizing the property power of attorney. The 2 fools from the Goof family still think you're sulking. She pulled up the chat history, and in Clara's latest social media post, Gray was peeling lychees for her with the caption, True siblings never need blood ties. I wrapped the jade bracelet fragments in the Sue embroidery handkerchief. Tomorrow morning at 9, the lawyer will go to the old house to inventory the belongings. The light swept over the sapphire cufflinks peeking out from the gap in the locker. Those were forcibly given to me by Sean last year on my birthday. As for their things, let them be a nest for the mice. Soon it was the day I was going abroad. When Piper slapped the boarding pass into my palm, my phone buzzed in my bag like a dying bee. Gray and Sean each made countless calls, and after I ignored them, they frantically sent me messages. Are you done making a fuss? Clara is crying and wants to find the master to help fix the bracelet. Are you satisfied now? If you come back to apologize now, I can still be your brother. You treat the things I gave you as garbage. Avril, you're ruthless. Do you think leaving these behind can erase 20 years of feelings? Naive. I opened the voice message, and Clara's tearful "I'm sorry" Avril pierced through the noise of the waiting hall. Piper suddenly snatched the phone, coldly sneering into the recording hole. Gray, listen well. Avril's flight is called, screw you. I took a sip of lemon water, and my fingertips brushed over the last voice message. Clara continued to sob. Avril, please don't be angry anymore, okay? In the background, there was a faint sound of porcelain shattering, probably Sean smashing the set of blue and white porcelain in the study again. I blocked all their contact information. The flashing green light at the boarding gate is like Grandma's desk lamp. I remember when she taught me to make Chinese knots, she said. The thread ends must be burned clean, so they won't unravel. Before the plane took off, the maid, Aunt Chin, secretly sent me the video she had taken. The study in the GU residence. The camera is partially obscured by a vase. The 13th time Sean dialed the same number, the mechanical voice was particularly jarring in the silence. Definitely a signal problem. Gray loosened his tie, the sapphire cufflink stained with whiskey. Last time she ran away from home, didn't she come back by herself? The camera shifts, capturing Gray curled up on the sofa, flipping through an album. His fingertips repeatedly caressed a certain photograph, the moonlight illuminating the faded red string around his wrist, identical to the one I burned. Sean's eyes were vacant. She used to come to me crying even when she cut her finger. Then, the two men stared blankly at a wall. There used to be all my honor certificates from elementary school to high school posted there, but of course, they are gone now. Before going abroad, I took the time to go back and took all my certificates with me. Now, only Clara's various certificates remain there. Sean kicked open the cardboard box, and the sapphire cufflinks clinked and rolled to Gray's feet. She really dares. Gray crushed half a box of the mint candies I had left, the ones I used to stuff in his pockets every day during the year he quit smoking. Book a ticket. I'm going to get him back right now. What ticket are you booking? Sean suddenly grabbed Gray by the collar. Back then, you said Clara was pitiful and spent more time with her. Now you're pretending to be so sentimental. The camera shakes and finally freezes on the torn paper cranes, 365 of them that Gray folded while staying up late before the college entrance exam, wishing for me to achieve my dream of getting into my desired university. Clara entered with a fruit platter. Sean, Gray, don't worry, Avril should come to her senses after a while. All right, you go back to your room and rest. Didn't you twist your leg today? Sean's tone towards her was really not good this time. We know what to do about other things. The video abruptly cut off with Sean's roar. Her passport expired a long time ago. Where can she run to? He didn't know that on the night I kept vigil with my grandmother's urn, I had already dug out the green card that had been pressed at the bottom of the drawer. It was something my mother had arranged for me when she didn't have much time left. Now it has become her daughter's last escape route. Monchin sent me a message. They all seem to regret it. They should soon see the true nature of that woman. She originally didn't dislike Clara that much, but her son had uremia before. Yet Clara wouldn't let her take a leave and insisted that she make her specialty, crystal shrimp dumplings. Of course, Clara wasn't so straightforward at the time. She just pretended to be very understanding. Aunt Chin has something to do, so she should go back first. It's just, I really want to eat, Sai. It's all my fault for being so greedy. This was said in front of Sean, so Sean immediately let Chin Ma stay and prepare the shrimp dumplings before going back. Because she couldn't give up this job, Chin Ma was anxious and tormented, but she had no choice but to endure and stay. In the end, I couldn't bear to see Aunt Chen's swollen red eyes, so I let her leave first and even gave her some money to pay for her son's medical expenses. Sean didn't blame Chin Ma later. He just took this incident as one of the pieces of evidence against Clara and scolded me again. I smiled and replied to Chin Ma, "Thank you, Chin Ma, but you don't need to tell me about their matters anymore." On the day I landed in Paris, there was a light fog, and Grandma Chin was waiting for me at Charles de Gaulle Airport, wrapped in a cashmere shawl. My grandmother always said she was a Chanel-wearing warrior. Sure enough, the old lady was cursing the taxi driver who was overcharging her in French while pulling out the keys to my new apartment and the job offer from the Design Institute for her Hermes bag. Your grandmother entrusted me to take care of you, and I can't let her lose face before God. Thanks to Grandma Shin's help, I hardly had to exert any effort to solve the most troublesome accommodation issue upon arriving in a foreign land. After a simple shopping trip, I made myself a light lunch, and after eating, I took a short nap. Piper's video call popped up at 3 in the afternoon, and she was chugging iced Americanos while sporting dark circles under her eyes. Clara now looks like a kicked chihuahua. Yesterday, I went shopping and happened to see her pretending to faint and grabbing Gray's shirt corner. Guess what? Gray just shook her off and shouted, "Can you just be quiet for a moment?" The camera shook, revealing her computer's Facebook with 2 people's 99+ unread messages. Those 2 jerks are blocking my garage every day now. Sean even dug out the broken watercolor pencils you gave him in kindergarten, insisting that I must know where you are. She suddenly leaned closer to the camera and lowered her voice. Gray, with his scruffy beard, told me that every night he dreams of you piecing the jade bracelet back together, revealing his name in the moonlight. I feel very sorry for Piper because, due to the partnership between her family and the Goof family, she can't block those 2. You might as well go abroad with me. Piper wailed. I would like to, but my dad is forcing me to take over the family business. Nowadays, I leave early and come home late just to look at reports and accounts. Ugh, she said, becoming serious again, a bit worried. Those 2 bitches are sending people to look for you nonstop, you. I comforted her, it should be fine. I used to go to the UK, the US, and Japan often. They probably wouldn't think I would be in France. But I thought it was somewhat beautiful, because half a year later I saw Sean and Gray again. That day, when I pushed open the apartment door holding a plastic bag from the supermarket, I first smelled the sour, rancid odor of the leftover whiskey. Gray curled up on the steps, asleep, his suit wrinkled like a rag, the tie loosely tied around Sean's wrist. They had actually tied themselves together with a red string that had once bound my birthday gift, as if that would prevent them from losing each other again. Avril. Sean sprang up from beside the trash can, stubble sticking to a piece of dry leaf. He raised the Dorian thermos, a Christmas gift I gave him in middle school, with dried cola stains still stuck in the scratches on the cup. When Gray woke up, he knocked over the cardboard box by his feet, and I caught a glimpse of the exposed fragments of a cherry blossom specimen. At 19 in Kyoto, he had squatted on the steps of the shrine for 3 hours, saying he wanted to keep spring forever for me. We searched 7 countries. Gray's voice was like a rusty piano string. He reached out to touch the baguette in my arms, only to suddenly realize that his fingertips were tinged with Clara's perfume, and he recoiled as if electrocuted, rubbing them vigorously on his pants. I crossed the baguette over my chest as a weapon, Mr. Sean. According to Article 226-3 of the French Penal Code, illegal intrusion can result in imprisonment. Gray suddenly knelt down and rummaged through the cardboard box. Look. My brother and I restored the old house, your room. Even that wilted pot of mint on the windowsill. That's basil. I interrupted him. You can never tell my potted plants apart, just like you can't distinguish Clara's lies. Sean shook out a yelled Ultraman t-shirt. I've kept the sheet you wet when you were 10. You said your brother's wardrobe is a time machine. Why are there no mom and grandma in the time machine? I lifted the trash can, revealing the cigarette box they had just thrown away. Just like you always have Clara's asthma medication in your pockets, yet you can't remember that I'm allergic to nicotine. Gray suddenly clutched his chest and crouched down, and I instinctively took a half-step back. The man who once shielded me from the wine bottles now looks up at me in the same posture Clara used to feign heartache. What will it take for you to come back? I'll send Clara to a mental hospital if you want. Or should I just die? I watched him pull a stack of photos from the inner pocket of his suit, his fingertips trembling as he spread them out on the steps. In the surveillance screenshot, Clara is wearing my old nightgown, crushing sleeping pills, and pouring them into his whiskey glass. You left the next day, and she climbed into my bed. His throat felt like it had swallowed shards of glass, but she doesn't have that scar on her back. The scar from when you shielded me from the boiling water when you were 15. Sean suddenly tore open his shirt, revealing a faded French tattoo on his chest that read "Sister." "Clara tore up all your photos, so I carved the memories into my flesh." He dug his fingers into the scab tattoo, "But no matter how I tattoo it, I can never get the original you back. We chose the most remote sanatorium for her." Gray hurriedly added, "She will definitely not appear in front of us again." I rubbed the twisted branch pattern carved by Grandma Shin on the apartment key and suddenly remembered my grandmother's words. When jade is broken, it can be repaired with gold, but when a heart is broken, gold leaf will only cut and bleed. I remained silent for a long time before finally speaking. "Sean, the night I had a fever when I was 12, you said you would always protect me." His pupils suddenly constricted, and then when I turned 20 and had a fever of 39 degrees, that night he was holding Clara while watching a concert. My phone was dead, and I was so sick I could barely make a sound, almost crawling to the landline to make the emergency call. "Gray, you swore at Grandma's funeral that you would love me for her." I tugged at my collar, but later that night when Clara tore up my design award certificate, you said, "You can find your award information online." Clara didn't mean it, don't be too harsh. They stumbled back, as if each of my words were poisoned arrows. The gray watch hit the stone steps. The dial cracked like a spider's web. This was the coming-of-age gift I gave him when he turned 18. And back then he said he would wear it into the next life. I pressed the alarm button on the smart door lock, and the siren startled the pigeons from under the eaves. "I can never go back. Every time you come, I will call the police." A year later, I returned to my country to attend a class reunion. While I was touching up my makeup in the bathroom, Clara's tattered skirt suddenly flashed in the mirror. "Avril, I invite you to watch the fireworks." Her sweet, cloying voice mixed with the smell of ether pressed against the back of my neck, and at the moment the syringe pierced my skin, I thought to myself that the sanatorium really seemed unreliable. In the end, this trapped beast was not restrained. When I woke up, the iron chain rubbed against the old scar on my ankle, and Clara was tying explosives with Gray's tie. That tie clip was chosen by me, reflecting her twisted smile at this moment. I informed Gray and Sean that if they don't come, I will blow you up here. Do you think they chose you, or did they choose themselves? At that moment, the surveillance screen lit up, showing Gray and Sean crashing into the warehouse. Clara frantically pulled my hair. "Why? Why do I go through so much trouble and they still love you? Why do you have it so easy? I took away your dad, your brother, and your boyfriend, but you still have your grandma and your mom to pave the way for you. And those two worthless men have been finding me displeasing ever since you left, constantly muttering your name. Even that old man of yours." She turned around and kicked over a piece of metal. "The will he made before he died says you and Sean split the inheritance. They say they treat me like their own daughter, but in reality, they only left me a house and $1 million, and I don't get a share of the inheritance." Hypocritical. I thought to myself that she really wronged me, because I also didn't know that my father had left me so much inheritance. It was probably because Sean's savior complex flared up before, feeling sorry for Clara that he kept this matter from me, and conveniently used the excuse of he's the one supporting me to manipulate me. Gray and Sean burst into the room. Sean's face turned pale. "Clara, let Avril go. Otherwise, I will make you wish you were dead." Gray said nothing, just kept staring at Clara's every move. Clara smiled strangely and said, "It's useless. You will never be able to save this bitch." She suddenly raised the knife and stabbed down at me. As the tip of the knife approached the cheekbone, the iron door of the warehouse was slammed open with a piercing sound. Clara's hand trembled, and a line of blood immediately seeped from my neck. 30 seconds later, the riot shield broke through the window, and the scene of Piper holding a megaphone and screaming was broadcast live on the surveillance screen. She was even wearing slippers, and her hair was a mess, like a typhoon had passed through. In the moment Clara was stunned, Gray grabbed a rusty iron rod and struck her wrist. The sound of bones shattering and the wail of a siren erupted simultaneously. The police rushed in and pinned Clara to the ground. But just as she was about to be handcuffed, she suddenly erupted, knocking the police officer's sidearm from his waist. She slowly rolled to my feet, her twisted and hideous face reflecting, "If we're going to die, let's die together." Sean's movement towards her was faster than when he protected Clara back in the day. As the blade sank into his side, Gray pulled me into his embrace. The warm blood sprang onto his back where he had shielded me from the basketball. Clara was pressed down to the ground again, This time the police were much more forceful, and she absolutely could not break free.
Why?
Why you should have everything taken away from you by me. You should be trampled under my feet. She is still screaming. You've always taken nothing but trash. I walked over and saw her twisted like a maggot under the control of the police. Even hating you feels like a waste of time. Sean is not in life-threatening danger, but the doctor tactfully indicated that one of his kidneys would have difficulty functioning in the future. He saved my life after all, so I eventually went to the hospital to see him. He looked very weak on the sickbed, and when he saw me, he smiled faintly with a pale face. Avril, I'm not trying to repay a favor, but could you possibly? I interrupted him. I forgive you. A sparkle of hope burst forth in his eyes. But that's all there is to it. If you expect that we can restore any sibling bond between us, I advise you to give up that fantasy as soon as possible. The bond between siblings disappeared long ago when you repeatedly favored Clara. The light in his eyes extinguished. When I left the ward, I heard a sobbing apology coming from inside. I'm sorry. A faint sting passed through my heart. But that was not for Sean, but for the beauty that once truly existed and has now vanished without a trace. Arriving in front of the elevator, Piper was leaning against the wall, munching on a sandwich, and looked up at me, shaking her phone. Grandma Shun is asking when you're coming back, she said. The cherry blossoms at the Paris studio are in full bloom. On the day I set off back to Paris, I received a call from Father Lin. Gray is in the late stage of liver cancer. The old man's voice was like sandpaper. The doctor said at most 3 months. He wants to see you one last time. I caressed the gold and laid on my jade bracelet. Piper previously introduced me to a skilled master craftsman who put in a lot of effort and finally repaired the jade bracelet my grandmother left me. Uncle, that's not appropriate. On the other end of the phone came a suppressed sigh. Avril. He still has the watch you gave him on his bedside table, and he won't even fix it. Uncle knows that he was wrong to you before, but can you? I remained silent for a long time, then said, I'm sorry, Uncle. I hung up the phone and walked towards the boarding gate with my luggage. A few days after returning to Paris, I woke up to the simultaneous voice messages from Sean's lawyer and Piper. Besides the inheritance you were entitled to, Mr. Gu has also transferred all his shares to you and is willing to serve as a professional manager. The lawyer's voice sounded like he was reciting a eulogy. He said this as a belated dowry. Piper's tone was somewhat complicated. Gray is gone. He was still holding the watch you gave him. I replied with an O to indicate that I received it. Piper's voice immediately came back. Darling, you wouldn't have softened your heart, would you? Let me tell you. Am I the kind of person who goes back on their word? Let's not talk about that. When are you coming to Paris? I'll treat you to a Michelin 3-star meal. I replied to Piper's message while getting out of bed to wash up, get dressed, and do my makeup. Today, Grandma Shin invited me, saying she wanted to introduce me to a handsome guy with golden hair, who is said to be the design director of a luxury brand. As I pushed open the door to the restaurant, Grandma Shun was winking at me while holding up a champagne glass. Sweetheart, this is Alex. His grandfather is an alumnus of your grandmother. The blond man turned around, his blue eyes like the morning mist over the Seine. I heard you restored a legendary emerald? I'm in need of a partner. A light rain began to fall outside the window. Spring had finally arrived in Paris.